Hello everyone and welcome back to MixBus TV mixing and mastering tutorials on YouTube. Second episode of our metal series. Today we break down the drums. So as usual in the info box down below there's the link to listen to the final product. As I mentioned in the previous video, I had one project for tracking and one project for mixing, and this one that I'm showing you now is the tracking project, so we can listen to the tracks raw. And I did this because I wanted to fix a couple of things right there when I was tracking before importing the tracks that I needed for the mix. Not only on drums, but also on guitars, because I had 7 microphones on each cabinet, so I had a lot of guitars and I didn't need all of them. So I kind of committed to the sounds that I already liked when I was tracking, and then I imported those in a new project, in the mix project. So let's start with the drums and let's take a look at what microphone / channels we have. We have a kick mic that was a Beta 52. Then we have a top and bottom microphone, was a 57 and a Audix i5. A hi-hat mic, which I don't remember what it was. Tom and floor tom microphones were Sennheiser MD 421s, 2 Octava MK012 as overhead, and stereo room microphones, which were 2 Neumann U87 pointed at the ceiling. They were in spaced pair position as far as possible from the drum. So let's listen to the raw tracks. Okay, very natural sounding. The room wasn't that big. I wanted a room that was pretty dead for this kind of project. And as soon as I listened to the recording, I was noticing 2 things. The first one was bothering me a lot, and was the sound of the China cymbal bleeding into the tom and floor tom microphone a lot, causing this kind of phasey sound here. Let me solo it. You can hear this splashy, phasey sound that is not pleasant at all. Let me take these 2 microphones, the floor tom and the tom, out. Listen to the difference. A lot cleaner. So at mix time I tried to keep them on, but the sound was just nasty, so I muted those 2 mics and opened them only when the drummer actually was using the tom or the floor tom, which was really just this bit here, which I retriggered just the tom, but we'll see that later. And then the second problem was the kick right away, because we had the drummer using one of our drums in studio and he wasn't comfortable with the kick, so it played well, but the sound wasn't that consistent, that punchy, like when he plays with his drum. And let's listen to the kick drum solo. You can even see the dynamic is kind of a little too wild for being a kick. Snare solo, snare top. Snare bottom. Together. And we have the hi-hats. Then let's listen to the tom track when he actually uses it. With the floor tom mic too. The thing is, these 2 mics, when they are together, they kind of give the drum depth, but that China was just nasty sounding, bleeding into them. So then we have the overheads. There were 2 Octava. and the room mics. Let's listen all together. So what did I do right away after recording was actually augmenting the kick with two samples. The first one is this. And the second is this one. One is mono, one stereo. And this was the original kick. So one is stereo, gives a little bit of ambient. This one gives a little bit of click. And these are the three together. So I imported these tracks, including the two triggers, into the mix project. Let's take a look at it. Here we have our mix project with the drum tracks. I bounced the three kick drum tracks that we've seen in the recording project to one track, the one at the top here, and imported just that. And then we have the original tracked snare, top and bottom. Then we have the trigger for the tom, which I triggered with Dramagogue. And as you can see, I got rid completely of the tom and floor tom mics. I didn't have any use for those. The overhead track and the room track, which you can see is automated to open and close, actually mute and unmute during the song. And this is how the drum sounds now. We have a snare verb. Let's see what we have done with this kick drum. So we said the kick drum is actually a sum of three tracks, the original one, a mono sample, and a stereo sample. And it sounds like this by itself. First plugin is an SSL-G. You can see the EQ, and there's quite a bit of compression going on. Without. I want to point out one thing right away, the importance of the gate for this drum. Yes, the compression changed the sound. Yes, the filters limit the bandwidth. We take out some boxiness at 500 Hertz and we compress quite a lot. But the gate is really what makes the kick firm. Listen to it with or without. Then we have VEQ4, taking out few dB at 330. Filters again, high pass and low pass filter. Let's listen with and without. Then SSL comp to give it some snap. Just a little bit. And finally EQ. Again, to remove some boxiness here and give it some more bite at the top. Snare, top. It doesn't have pretty much anything. Just a little bit of top end with the SSL and nothing else. Bottom, snare, same thing. It actually doesn't have anything at all, just the SSL for color. But they both go to the snare sum, which is this yellow one, and we have a gate. Without, would sound like this. Quite some bleed from the cymbals. Little bit of EQ, filters and compression from the G channel. Nothing major. SSL EQ. Remove some boxiness. Add some top end and filter out. Just a little bit of compression with the API. Just a little bit of snap. As you can see, the processing here is not aggressive at all. And then the interesting thing on the snare is, since that I didn't replace it or augment it with any samples, which is pretty common in this genre, I wanted a little more bottom out of it, and I used max bass. It makes it a lot more beefier. EQ, a little more top end, and a little 400 cut. Without. Again, on the snare, we are on the snare sum. There's some limiting, which is not so gentle. But I wanted this splat. This is exactly what I wanted. I wanted the sound a little bit longer and a little less pointy. So a little more splat is what I was going for. And the L2 did the trick. There's volume difference, of course, but listen to the attack. They might sound better without, but in mix, you could only pick up the very fast attack of the snare and none of the tail. And I didn't like that. It sounded like a tin can, which is already thin, this snare, and is okay. But yeah, I wanted the sound to be a little bit longer. And that's why I put this reverb on it. Let's listen to it. It's only on the snare. I'm compressing the snare going in. I'm cutting all the bottom frequency from it before hitting the verb. Let's hear it without. It sounds very dirty. And then a simple reverb. The difference that makes this verb on the whole kit is ginormous. Let's listen to it without the verb. With the verb. Listen how just using the verb on one element of the drum, it makes the whole kit sounds bigger and sounds like it's in a real space. Well, it was in a real space. We'll take a look at the room mics in a second, but in a much bigger space. Let's keep going on with our channels. We saw the top and bottom mic, and one thing that you should notice is I removed the hi-hat. I had the hi-hat track, but I didn't need that at all because I had a lot of hi-hat from the overhead and from the room mic, actually. And that's because the hi-hat itself, the drummer was using, was very, very loud. And we will see another song. I actually had a problem. And I had to do a couple of tricks to reduce the hi-hat bleed into the mics and the overheads. So I have a tom trigger. The tom was used only for these fills. I retrigger it because, like we said before, the cymbals were bleeding into the tom mics and not in a good way. So this was a trigger, and we have an SSL channel, cutting filters, removing a lot actually, top end, mid highs and mid lows, and some compression. Gating. To make it a little more firm. Then EQ. Again, removing the very top end and adding some bottom, removing some boxiness. Compression, simple. It gives it a lot more grit, a lot more aggressiveness. Notice that the release is pretty slow because we don't want the tail to come out. We want the compressor to keep the tom pinned. A little bit of reverb in insert, something that I don't usually do, but it was a little dry. %, you can see the settings, no pre-delay. And after the verb, I needed some EQ, because the verb was adding this resonance here at 400. Okay, so the point here is when you use a trigger, when you use a sample sound, don't be afraid to treat it as a recorded tracks. Mix it, okay? Don't leave it as is. Overheads, let's take a listen.